Okay, so in order to really begin our exploration of what government is, with an especial focus on United States government, since that's what this class is about, it's pretty important that we understand what the purpose of governments anywhere are. Why do we establish governments? Why do we even need them? And as it turns out, of course, the Constitution, which is the document that establishes all of the laws and structures of our government, of course, it talks about all of the purposes of government. But the preamble, so the kind of introduction to this document, actually does a really killer job, as every introductory paragraph should, of really talking about what's in the Constitution and therefore quickly describing the things that governments should really do. So I kind of wanted to talk about the purpose of government by breaking down the preamble to the Constitution and seeing what's in there and seeing if that can help illuminate that for us. So of course here is the preamble itself. I'm going to go ahead and not read this to you, A, because you have eyes and can read, but also because Schoolhouse Rock does a really cool job of making this song and video that sings about the preamble and will get it stuck in your head forever. And it's in the project briefcase, and you might have already even watched it by the time you are watching this. So I'll spare all of you that section. But it is worth saying that this is the way that the preamble looks, and all of the sections that we're going to look at in this presentation take directly from the language of this preamble to describe purposes of government. So the first one, to form a more perfect union. So, of course, after the revolution, we had a pretty uncertain future. We weren't really sure what we wanted to do or what would happen next, or what the government would be. Again, the Articles of Confederation was terrible. It was too loose. It didn't work especially well. But we knew that we wanted to closely link the American people and make more of a United States. And so part of what the purpose of government is here, as well as our Constitution, of course, is to make it so that within a state, that all of the people and all of the territory within a state use governments essentially as a uniting function. So one of the purposes of government, simply put, is to make it so that everybody within that state is organized, that everything is placed in one sort of unit. So that's one of the first purposes. Next is to establish justice. We have governments in order to help us establish justice. And of course, the first thing that you'll think of when you think of establishing justice, I'm sure, is the law. And so governments are established to create laws, but also to make sure that those laws are reasonable. So it isn't like if you are late to school one day, then you get the electric chair. But also that laws are fair, so that in theory, everyone is supposed to be held accountable to these laws in exactly the same way, but also impartial. So it isn't that having a certain judge will determine whether or not you get good treatment or bad treatment, or that they will hold your own personality against you with the law. It's supposed to be impartial, regardless of who you are. You should be treated equally and fairly. And of course, this is sort of an ongoing struggle. There's all of the civil rights stuff. There's the Black Lives Matter movement. There's a lot of gender inequality stuff, I would argue. So this is sort of an ongoing struggle, of course, but it is one of the purposes of our government to help make sure that everyone can come to a common agreement to make sure that justice is indeed served. And there's a quote there from Thomas Jefferson that points to the fact that he believed that establishing justice was one of the most sacred duties of government. So next, one of the things that government is responsible for is ensuring domestic tranquility. And that just essentially means that a government is responsible for making sure that peace is kept at home. So some of these pictures, you can see that there are some things in here that help illustrate that. Of course, fire departments help keep peace at home. We have police that help keep the peace at home. We have the National Guard. We have FEMA, who helps to protect people or help restore folks' lives after awful floods or natural disasters. But of course, we want our government to be able to help us to avoid riots, so that if people are upset about something, that we have police there to help make sure that things don't become dangerous for everyone else. And of course, once again, those emergency services, so that the government will provide stuff to make sure that we are all safe and that everything at home stays reasonable, that we can, assume that we will be safe in our daily lives. But also, we want our government to provide for the common defense and what that sort of means. So, ensuring domestic tranquility, of course, was keeping things safe, at home. But providing for the common defense also implies that our government should work to help keep us safe from things from the outside. So here's where we start looking at both the military, which I would argue is probably the most obvious one that most people jump to when they think about this, but also foreign policy. So not just military operations, not just using weapons, but providing for the common defense also means that our government should have the ability to communicate with other countries, to make treaties, to make agreements, to make friendships, to do all of those sorts of things that also help to keep us safe, from other places. And of course, this is one of those things that the United States in particular considers to be especially important. Um, and the military and interacting with other countries is actually greater than 20% of the budget and has been for quite some time. So clearly that's a thing we value pretty highly. So the next, a government is established to promote the general welfare. And so not only do we want to make sure that folks are safe, and that peace is kept at home, but we also want to make sure that folks have a pretty, high standard of living and that people are able to be healthy and happy while within the country that the government is representing. And so for the U.S., of course, this is where public schools come in. The government wants to make sure that everyone at home has opportunities, to better themselves, and so they provide opportunities for folks to go to public schools. The government is also in charge of making sure that there's clean water and fresh air and safe food for people to eat. And also, of course, there's a certain amount of social safety nets. So when you hear the word welfare, of course, your mind probably immediately jumps to things like the temporary assistance for needy family stuff, formerly known as food stamps, unemployment, social security, those kinds of things. So the government's also, of course, responsible for helping to make sure that there are some stuff in place to help make sure that folks are able to survive also. Again, as a country and politically, we're always kind of having discussions about where to draw the line as to where the government's providing too much help or not enough help. And that issue changes all the time and is one of the cool things about our democracy, that we have the ability to influence that as times change and as opinions change. But of course, these situations here are fairly modern examples, and social safety nets didn't, of course, always exist, and the government didn't always, have an active role in clean water and fresh air and stuff, as you will remember from American studies. And also, it'll be interesting to see what we decide that the government should be responsible for doing into the future. So I guess we will see how that goes. But also, of course, the government is responsible for securing the blessings of liberty, so protecting individual freedoms. So our government is responsible for making sure that we have the Bill of Rights and that there are people protecting those rights. And then, of course, there's this issue that there's a statement that our freedoms aren't free. And this issue sort of has to be understood by the citizens in order for this to actually function, right? We need people that are willing to understand the importance of these freedoms and also be willing to protect them before they will be able to exist at all.